Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings. Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast from Practical E-Commerce, hosted by entrepreneur Eric Bandholz.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another E-Commerce Conversations. I hope all is going well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the table from me, Patrick.
What's up, man?
Hey.
How are you?
Welcome to Austin.
Welcome to Austin. It is oppressively hot. I don't know how you do this all year round.
I don't. I'm going to Denmark.
That's right. You're going to Denmark, and it'll be nice and cool. Yeah, it's about 104 for people who aren't in Austin. Yeah. But yeah, excited to be here as the first, maybe not the first, non-e-commerce operator guest. So I'm pretty excited.
You got long sleeves on too, and dressed for Austin's weather.
This is just my fear of the sun. I live in an island now in Puerto Rico, and so basically I fear the sun all the time. So lots of sun shirts, all that kind of fun stuff.
Well, let's give our listeners, what the hell do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't answered that question in a while. So I'm the chief strategy officer over at Paddle, but the thing that most people probably have heard of me, if not heard of me, is I ran and bootstrapped a company called ProfitWell. We help subscription companies, subscription SaaS, subscription e-commerce, subscription media, basically understand their business with this free metrics tool. So you can plug it into your Stripe, Recharge, Braintree, whatever you're using for payments, and get all of your reporting for free. We had about 45,000 different brands using that. And then the way we made money is we studied all that data, and then we had a couple of products that helped with your retention. So helping basically reduce your cancellations, and then help with your pricing, your monetization. And so 10-year journey, started it with just me in a room working 18 hours a day, like a lot of folks probably listening. And then just over a year ago, we sold to Paddle, which is a billing and payments company. And yeah, it's been a fun ride with all the ups and downs, and then obviously a nice little ending to that part of the journey as well.
Well, I've got an interesting question that is going to be put in an interesting way.
Okay, great.
Before we hit record, we were chatting a little bit, but you went from a bootstrap business where, it's always, allocation of resources to like the nth degree.
Yeah.
But then you've become God.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's so weird because, so to give some context, so we, again, the Midwest in me prevents me from trying to be braggadocious here, but I grew up in Wisconsin. So, we sold the company for over $200 million. So, and bootstrap company. So you can kind of do a little bit of math there. And I literally in January of, so we sold the company in 2022 in the beginning. So I signed the LOI January 15th of 2022 or thereabouts. And at that point, I had just under $20,000 in my bank account. Which is
crazy. Like, how big was that company at that time?
So we were doing 8 figures in recurring revenue. We were over 10 million in recurring revenue.
But you weren't paying yourself?
I was paying it was kind of funny. My average salary over the 10 years was, I think, like $74,000. My exit salary, meaning when I sold the company, was only $150,000. Because as a bootstrapper, I think, and I'm not saying this was a good thing. I'm not proud of this necessarily. I think I would do this differently because towards the end, it was definitely shading our decisions a little too much. We were getting to this point where we definitely weren't going to go into 2022, 2023 without either raising money, building this into a profitable, taking profit out type business, or we weren't really thinking of selling at that point. But yeah, had to always put all the money back into the business. And we were also, what was kind of cool is my wife and I, we always like to have kind of like a mission. And our mission at the time was, very Dave Ramsey to kind of pay off the house. Yeah. So we were putting everything, we were, doing her job, everything into the house. So we did have a paid off house, $19,000, ish dollars in the bank account, and then, sold the company. And we closed April, right at the end of April, 2022. And if you're kind of remembering your history, it literally every
you're
week,
the guy that was driving the prices up for everything.
Yeah, something like that. But literally every week something bad happened.
Yeah.
Every week since the LOI to close, there was, Putin has his tanks right outside Ukraine. Oh, Putin has invaded Ukraine. Oh, the market has crashed. Oh, this thing happened. And part of the adventure with diligence was Paddle had to go raise money to pay for the deal.
Oh.
And so you also had to have this situation where you had to find the right investor and all this other fun stuff. And so, yeah, but it was pretty even keeled. Like, I think this is the thing we were talking about a little bit before, like, especially if you're a bootstrapper, but even if you're a venture-backed kind of operator, you get this really thick skin that you don't even realize you're building. Because if you take maybe like something in school or your childhood or your previous job where you would get affected, then all of a sudden you start the best self-help program, I think, which is be an entrepreneur, and you get kicked in the face every day. Sometimes they're good kicks, sometimes they're bad kicks. You learn to kind of regulate your emotions where it's like, oh, there's that fire. Like, well, you 10 years ago, you would have been freaking out. Now you're just like, okay, we'll get through this, right? Well, so you're really even keeled. So I was pretty even keeled. The only frustrating thing during diligence was people were, some of the people in the know were pulling out their calculators and trying to calculate like what this meant for them, et cetera. And so their emotions were kind of a little all over the place and you kind of had to handle that. But then at close and at announcement, all of a sudden just the even keeledness, it didn't change internally for me. Like I got to this point where I was, in this, bad wiring, I would say this is not a healthy thing, but I was very, well, if I did it, it must not have been that hard. Therefore, like, what's the big deal, right? Which again, not healthy. I was not hugged enough as a child, et cetera. But then everyone starts treating you like this god. And you have former employees who were not fun employees to exit with. Oh, sorry about that Glassdoor review. You have ex-girlfriends who are like, oh, you're the one that got away. Longer conversations. I'm summarizing here. You have people who, like VCs, not a venture-backed company, being like, basically, they're the reason that we were so successful. Like that happened on Twitter and such. And then you have the situation where everyone's like, oh my God, like this is amazing. You guys are great. This is awesome. They're retweeting stuff you wrote 5 years ago as if now it's right, even though, it hasn't changed in 5 years, et cetera. And you get this like, well, am I a god? Like, did I do that? And then the fall that starts coming is all of a sudden imposter syndrome starts to kick in because you're like, well, this is not a no deal, but I didn't think this was as big of a deal as people are treating it, even though it is, a pretty big deal. So all of a sudden you're like, was it a fluke? Like, can I do this again? Oh my God. I've never feared death before. I'd never feared death. And now all of a sudden I fear death because there's this pile of money sitting in my savings account. And what am I going to do? Am I going to rich correctly? How do you rich? Like, that's just such a weird, like all these weird emotions. And then that kind of tanks. And I call it the champagne cycle of just, screwery, just because it's like, it's just such a weird thing that not all of us are going to go through, unfortunately. And but it is one of those things that is not fun. And I can go through the rest of the cycle.
Well, I think a couple of things. I think it's interesting because I tend to gravitate towards other bootstrappers. Yeah. I think there's probably a different mindset between a bootstrapper and, like maybe a traditional VC where they kind of expect the riches. They've already planned it out. Yeah.
Like, that's the end of the journey, right?
Yeah, it's the end of the journey. They're going to make a bunch of money. They're going to buy their yachts and their Lambos, and then they're going to be like, look at me. I am this god that everyone makes you out to be. I am actually that person. So I think
it's all about the pump.
They lean into that a little bit. Real quick question, like why or how or was it made public how much you were acquired for? What was the strategy behind that?
So
because like for me, like a bootstrap guy, I would just be like, I don't want anyone to know.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was an element of, we had built, part of the reason that we were being bought was because of our brand. And so I had done, we had, 8 different podcasts and video series. We like went all in on media for, the last 5 years of the business and now continuing on with the combined business. And so brand was a really, really big thing. And so there wasn't like a long conversation about it. It was just like, it was more of like an of course. And I don't think we would have changed it in hindsight with more thought. But the idea was, this is a big win for, a bootstrap company. A lot of the companies we sell to, they're not necessarily bootstrap, but like they're, other software companies. They're other companies that kind of appreciate it and understand the brand. And so Paddle buying this brand, especially as a European company coming into the US, now all of a sudden, like, let's use that as momentum, for the lack of a better phrase. And so I also think that for me, I never really thought about, I never thought in the way that you just described how you would think. I never even thought of, well, what are the advantages and disadvantages to being public about it? Yeah. Because I've had such a public, not life, but just my persona has been rather public in building ProfitWell. And so I never even thought of like, what are the implications of that? And there are implications, right? Like I had weird situations where people hit you up for money, like you become a target for scammers, all these other things that you now have to worry about, but you probably would have to worry about those anyways, whether it was public or not. It just accelerates that worry a little bit.
Do you, like, so many people are pitching business ideas, I assume now?
The day of, I kid you not, day of the announcement, 6 people hit me up to be LPs in a very unabashed way. Like, hey, this is great. Our fund's open, blah, blah, blah. Like very little congratulations, very little, hey, let's catch up. Just like people hit you up. And I get the game. It's like totally fine, but it's just one of those funny things where, you get hit up all the time for all kinds of stuff. And, again, being someone who likes to like give rather thoughtful responses to people, all of a sudden you're just inundated and you have to kind of change how you think about, how you interface with certain folks. You
mentioned how you had the imposter syndrome. Can I do it again?
I've just gotten over it, by the way. Yeah.
Did you try to do it again? Like, were there side hustles that you're like, why don't I dabble this? Or because you have essentially like unlimited resources compared to like you have 20K in the bank.
Yeah, of course.
Now you add 3 zeros to that or whatever.
Sure.
You could do anything, right?
Well, and so this is the second part of the journey. The second part of that journey is all of a sudden you have this feeling of, okay, let me get a little more educated, right? Like, what is a wealth manager? Like, I kid you not, I had no money in the market either.
Yeah.
It's not like I had all this other stuff going on. I had a paid off house, $19,000 in cash.
Yeah.
That's basically it. And so all of a sudden the first interest payment comes in my savings account. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is just a different world, right? Because that's years of my mortgage, coming in on this like crappy, this was before rates were going up, right? So you start talking to like wealth managers and insurance people and all this other stuff. So you start to get a little more educated, and that takes you from this like doldrum of, oh my God, like I'm going to screw this up, I'm going to lose it all, et cetera, kind of feeling. So all of a sudden I call it the like false peak of cocaine energy. I've never done cocaine, but I imagine it's how it feels where you're literally, as you just described, like I can do anything.
Yeah, Superman.
Therefore, let's do everything, right? So I hired 17 people for all kinds of stuff. Like not all in one entity, but I hired like 17 different people. I learned more about taxes than I think I ever knew. Like we bought 19 gas stations. Like we did all kinds of stuff. Now some of these decisions were terrible. The hiring 17 people and having them go do a bunch of different things.
How did you buy 19 gas stations?
So
was it like a single brand?
It was like a single. Okay. There was a without. I mean, we can go into the story really deep if you want, but there was a patriarch who passed away. He had owned 120 some stations, and then there was a group that was trying to sell them off essentially. Okay. But that was not only for investing in a pretty safe investment, but also there were some tax implications there that you had to kind of do that in the year that you had this big gain.
Okay.
My wife is a real estate person, and so she understands all this stuff infinitely more than I do. But you kind of like go very in all directions, right? And then you realize like that's not smart. And so you end up like honing it down a little bit and start to questioning like, well, what do you want, right? And what's really funny about this is you don't need money to like explore what you want. And I think that's a big problem that I had is I never really had done some of that exploration. Like I could have done this with, way before starting a company. I never wanted to go into business. This like wasn't the thing that I wanted to do with my life. And so I ended up kind of starting to explore like what I wanted to do. I hired a psychiatrist who interviewed all of my friends and who, interviewed my wife, all this other stuff. I took a bunch of exams and, all kinds of fun stuff. That was a fascinating experience. It sounds a lot more expensive than it is too. It wasn't like that expensive or anything like that. And then I did a lot of
nothing's expensive now for you.
No. Don't do that. It was not that. It was a few $1,000s. Come on. It was, which is, not nothing, but
it's a MacBook.
Long story short, like I did a bunch of exploration, and then the end of that, and I'm happy to go deep into any of that stuff, is now kind of coming out of like, okay, what do I want to do? Well, I really like, building. I really, really enjoy having a wall, like as a metaphor, like that I have to either punch through or go around or climb over. I really, really like walls, which is, pretty generic. There's a lot of people who like walls, right? Yeah. And they're not necessarily entrepreneurs. And so I'm kind of coming out of this now, just over a year later, where all of a sudden I'm like, okay, patience, all that kind of fun stuff, all the like cliche advice that you don't listen to, and, kind of coming out of it and now using this optionality that I've been given in order to, go do what I want next.
Yeah. So I would imagine that that's a really challenging thing, like that. What do I want to do next? Because it can be, and it is almost anything.
Yeah.
Or it is anything.
Totally.
Like there's one crazy direction crazy to me, like the Elon, where he took all of his PayPal earnings, doubled down into like SpaceX or whatever, living on $20,000.
Sure.
Yeah, like I assume you're not going that direction. Like
That is where I'm going.
oh
Yeah. I don't know how dramatic, or I don't know how to compare and contrast, but it's, so first I gotta see paddle through. Like that was an important thing, and so there's this journey that's not quite done. But I think that what I've kind of realized is, so again, there's nothing dramatic I bought.
Yeah.
I have no fancy car. I have a nice condo where I live now, but it is not the fancy version. It's, probably a pretty middle-class affordable place that we bought. And it wasn't because we're like so humble or anything. Yeah. It's just like, I realized that.
I'll take this with a grain of salt because Patrick's wearing a Carhartt shirt right
That's
now.
Right. That's right. No, seriously though. Like I grew up really blue collar. I grew up, pretty poor. And now that I had cash, and it also helped that, I'm not saying everyone has this luxury, but like, we skipped a few rungs, right? Yeah. Like we all of a sudden went from, a pretty modest, $450,000 house in Salt Lake, which is, not small, but also not like crazy, to all of a sudden being able to kind of, like we said, get whatever. And I think that the advantage of that was like, there wasn't any of this reaching. And I think one thing that really helped going through and talking to this psychiatrist and kind of thinking about what I want is, all of a sudden it was like, well, I don't like Lambos. I don't fit in a Lambo. Yeah. Therefore, like, why would I get a Lambo? Like, I don't have an affinity for those things. So it's not, and maybe I will grow an affinity for them, but I don't want to do things just because I'm supposed to, right? Just because I saw it on Instagram, those types of things. And so what I like to do is I love to just go all in on something, right? I just really, really like to go all in on something. And so the way we've kind of set things up is Jenny, who's, real estate, which tends to be a rather safe, kind of asset. Like she's going to protect our like downside basically and kind of run with those things. And I'm going to go, probably put too much into, the
too
next
much
thing.
in, but not all in.
Yeah. Not all in, but like way too much in, because I don't know. I don't know how you think about this. I think we're probably kindred spirits on some of these levels, but it's like, if you've been given the opportunity, like, you're born in America, you have a decent education, you have all these skills that you learn relatively early in life. Like, I kind of feel like a jerk if I'm not, and I'm not saying anyone should feel this way, but I'm just saying I feel like a jerk if I'm not like going all in.
Yeah.
I feel like a jerk if like, to my dad, who was, a union tinner in Wisconsin, or like the people I grew up with who were just going from construction job to construction job. If I just, end up on the beach, like writing my spreadsheet of investments or something like that, which again, I'm not judging that. Yeah. It just, for me, it's like, it just feels like I'm not doing service to where I came from, kind of a thing.
So I would take a different path because like I have like the things that I value in my hierarchy, like freedom is that.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that I wouldn't have walls or challenges or things that I would do. Like I would have to work because I enjoy work, but I would build a company in a way that doesn't limit my freedom. And like one of my concerns is like going the Elon route, going bigger and bigger, doubling down. It's cool, but at the end of the day, like you're tying yourself.
Sure.
I don't know what the business is. I don't know like how big it is or how you're going to operate it. But like for me, it's just like the burden of like tax compliance and, employees and
this or that,
rent, and just like, I wrote in my book, like the things that you own end up owning you.
Yeah.
So
the
it's
things
like,
that have your attention own you as well, right? For me, it's not. So the other thing that I did, and this gets to my own, we'll just say mental inefficiencies, we'll say, is in this kind of like, oh my God, I can do anything. Oh my God, I need help, hire a psychiatrist. I also started doing data collection. And so I don't know how well you know my career, but this is like a very common thing. Like I go get data, I find data, I publish data, I do all this other fun stuff. And one of our products, our pricing product, is very geared towards doing market research, which is, going and collecting data, survey data, all kinds of fun stuff. And so I ended up doing quite a bit of research, and we'll publish it at some point on, basically like happiness and, wealth, right? Because that whole $75,000 study, if you've heard of it, where it's like once you reach 75,000,
returns.
It's actually not true. And so it is true that if you go from $20,000 in income to $75,000, you'll have the greatest rise in well-being and happiness, right? But the study didn't include people who were wealthy, like millionaires. There were no millionaires. Didn't account for inflation, didn't account for a number of things. And in Richard Thaler's defense, who was one of the authors of the study, like they never claimed that that's what the study did. It was like the media took it on and kind of ran with it. But we started doing a bunch of data collection, and there's a bunch of other studies that have kind of extended that data. And long story short, the kind of hierarchy of happiness when it comes to like money, things is the lowest. Like things don't bring you like the joy unless they're like hobbies. Like if it's your hobby, that'll bring you more joy. Experiences is the next rung on the ladder. The next rung after that is like giving money to causes, not necessarily to charity, but like to causes or to things. And then the last rung is freedom, and it's freedom inducing activities, events, etc. And what's really interesting about what you said, really long preamble and preface, is I feel the exact same way, but my freedom stack is probably different than yours.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is like, I look at the freedom as the freedom of like my time almost doesn't like compute, even though I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's more like, well, I want this next rung of freedom, and this next rung of freedom is like buying a skyscraper. I don't want to buy a skyscraper. And I could buy a skyscraper right now, but I want the ability to, if that makes sense. And I think that unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it.
Well, how much does a skyscraper cost?
I can probably buy a skyscraper.
Right. I think you might be there, right?
But what I'm trying to say is like, it's not about the skyscraper. It's about, I'm going to keep chasing this like hierarchy of freedom, essentially, probably until I die. And it's not necessarily healthy. It's not necessarily, I don't know if that's a worthy cause or not, but it's just like the feeling that I've found where the idea of it keeps me going. And it's one of those things when you mix with like the mission orientation, which I'm like all in or all out with a mission. I think that's like this little special cocktail that's Patrick that's kind of driving me after all this like reflection the past year.
Now, you mentioned Dave Ramsey earlier.
Yeah.
Are you writing everything with checks now, or are you getting leverage?
I played with a little debt because this is the funny thing. If you didn't know, I think a lot of operators here probably do because you might have had debt, especially if you're in your commerce business listening. But yeah, you can, I threw everything into treasuries basically because I was like, the rates are going up. That's great. And then you can actually, I got 80% on the treasuries in terms of a credit line. So I'd never really played with debt before, besides a mortgage, and like I had a car payment, and within a weekend of watching Dave Ramsey clips, I like paid off the car because it's just like kind of got into that motion. So I played with a little bit of debt, and then it just didn't feel great. Like I loved the feeling of paying off the house, the freedom feeling that Dave Ramsey kind of talks about. Like I actually felt it. Wasn't as euphoric as I think he claims, but it was definitely there. And then all of a sudden when I had this credit line, it did kind of sit under my head. So I'm not like anti-debt, but I think like it just really depends on what it is. And I probably will not do it on a personal level. I'll probably only do it through entities and business entities and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I feel like you talk about like euphoria when it comes to acquiring things.
Yeah.
We bought our house in cash. So it's like being able to go
congrats,
write a check. Be like,
yeah,
here's a check. Crazy. Like I know most people will never do that in their life. They're always going to have a mortgage, even like in the entrepreneurial space, like it is.
Yeah.
People still
I think people don't appreciate that the math it's not math. Like it's like they're like, well, my mortgage is at this, I can get 8% in the market, blah, blah, blah. It's the wrong argument. It's the wrong conversation about it. Even now it's like we know people who have had good exits or really profitable businesses, and they're still doing all of this, like, I would say like stupid debt. Like I think debt for, and this is an opinion of mine, like debt for a bet or an investment or trying to do something, et cetera. I think that's great. Like that's your own prerogative. I think debt in order to just kind of play the numbers game, it's just like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand it. I think it's like, I know people who can buy a Lambo outright or buy a nice car outright, and they just don't.
Yeah.
And it's not like because they're using the money somewhere else.
Well, you know what it is? Like, what is it? They enjoy that.
They enjoy the game of it.
They enjoy so it's
like gambling almost. Yeah.
But like, what's interesting is because like you can do the math on it. It's like, how much time did I spend?
Sure.
Doing this financing, lining up this deal to save $10,000.
Yeah.
Like I spent 5 hours doing that. Like at a certain point of wealth, like that doesn't make sense. Like it would have just made sense to write the check, you own it. If you value your time, if you ever do the math formulation on your time. But it's like, I went to, Noah Kagan?
Yeah.
I went to Whole Foods with him, and we ordered some tacos. He's like, I go to Whole Foods and I order this and this and this because I'm getting the biggest taco.
Yeah.
I'm like, Noah, like, how much are you worth? And you're saving like 30 cents on a taco. But
I've had that moment with Noah as well. Not at Whole Foods, but I've had the moment where you're like, interesting. Okay, got it.
He's just driven to optimization.
Yeah.
Like hacking the menu.
Deal brain. Yeah.
He just can't turn it off.
Yeah. But to me, I totally respect it. It's just, I think
I'm not doing it.
I'm trying to pick my spots, right? And I'm really bad at this. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm really bad at this. And so I have to almost like hack my brain a little bit around, like we had talked about, I'm trying to get my health in order. So you had asked me like, well, do you have like a chef or something? And you don't need to have the exit I had to have a chef, right? But it's like, no, I don't. And part of it's because I'm sitting there and going, I don't know. I don't want to like figure it out. I don't want to like, the money, blah. I can just make my eggs, blah, blah, like that type of a thing. And so I think it's just picking your priorities. Yeah. Where I don't have this problem at all in different areas of my life. And I think, you have to get good at it in certain cases. Like I'm trying to get good. I'm always going to be like, not bad, but I'm always going to be improving a delegation just in business in general and just in my life in general, because I'm not necessarily great at it. My mind isn't for it. My mind is very jump in. And it's very, very similar mindset of like, well, Noah, that's his thing. He gets enjoyment out of it. But I know Noah optimizes the heck out of other things, right? Where he's really, really good at not being penny wise, pound foolish. So it's picking your spots, I think.
Yeah. I wouldn't say he's like being negligible with
no. It's part of his personality too. I think it just depends on, how you're wired and again, where you get that enjoyment from.
Are you, taking it to the personal level, like with that cash in the bank, are there ways that you're optimizing your personal life? Like,
yeah, we're just starting to get into a lot of this. And so one of the something really helpful for anyone listening, smartest thing we did, I got a buddy named Dan Martell. So if you're in the software space, you're aware of him, or if you've seen his content, he recommended 2 books. One book was Strangers in Paradise. It's an allegory about company being sold. There's 3 execs. One exec spends all the money, spoils their children, etc. And obviously it's not great. The other exec doesn't tell anyone about the exit, doesn't spend any of the money. It just sits there. And like, obviously that's not great. And then the middle, person, the Goldilocks is like, goes through the values and stuff. Amazing, amazing, amazing book to read with your partner and or if you have kids who are old enough. Amazing. I don't have kids, so, take that with a grain of salt, but it was amazing to read that with Jenny because it just opens up all these questions. What's important to us, right? Ramit Sethi talks about like, I can't remember what he calls it, but like where you want to spend your money and where you want to be, very thrifty, wealth circles or something like he calls it. It opens up conversations about that. Like, what are the things we actually enjoy doing that, yes, we could hire someone for, we could do, but we really enjoy it? What are the things if we could, would never do it again? And then what really opened up was, what are things that we feel like Jenny, I'm not throwing her under the bus, but maybe, I don't know if she wants me to share this, but it's not that bad. It was, she felt this obligation to kind of take care of the house. She didn't like doing it. She didn't necessarily enjoy it, but she just kind of felt this obligation to take care of the house. And I was like, I don't see this enjoyment from you. And I also don't get enjoyment out of you doing this. So like, you're not doing it for anyone but you. Like, let's get over this limiting belief, right? So that was the one book. And then there was another book called Beyond.
Did she?
Yeah, we're over. Like
cool.
So we.
I had the same problem with my wife. I'm
totally.
Dude, let's just hire someone to clean it out. Like, we don't need to have this argument about me doing the dishes.
I loved this book because it just opened up. I'm sure Ramit Sethi's book would do this as well, but like it just opened up all these conversations about, okay, so we're working on finding a personal assistant. It's not something that's that expensive. We could have done it years ago. It's probably going to be about $1,000 a month, which is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of even our prior life. Yeah. But that person's going to take care of Amazon packages, doing the returns if we need to do them, going to the post office, going to do the grocery shopping, doing this type of stuff, doing like little basic clean, like just the surfaces, a couple times a week, that type of stuff. Because we get joy when it's like that. We just don't necessarily like doing the work, and we're not going to bring the person who cleans our house, deep cleans our house every, couple weeks in every single day, right? So just like forced a lot of those conversations. And then anytime there was this like limiting belief from an emotional perspective, because again, you're wired probably in a couple different ways. Our wiring was, oh, we don't want to be a bother. Oh, no, we can do it. All that kind of stuff. And so that helped a lot. The other book was Jim Du's Beyond a Million. That book just helped understand like what a wealth manager does, that type of thing, what they don't do, those types of things. But those are the 2 books that were really helpful, and it forced some of these conversations. I think some of the other things, to answer your question directly, we have a joint virtual assistant who kind of handles, it's probably nothing that like people haven't heard before, but just handles a lot of that stuff. But there isn't like there isn't like a crazy thing that we have. We do have kind of a list of things that we like want to do in life, which I think is really helpful. Not only just kind of bucket list type stuff, but we want to host Thanksgiving. We want to be the family that hosts Thanksgiving every year, right? And that book helped that conversation. And even if you're not going to have an exit or anything like that, I think it's worth kind of reading, because if you're running a 7-8 figure e-commerce brand, you're probably going to do okay in your life just in general.
When you have this goal of hosting Thanksgiving, like in your mind, is this like subsidizing people's plane tickets to come to you? Okay.
Yeah. Or like we're going to, so we're doing it in Puerto Rico. That's where I live. We did it last Thanksgiving as well, where we ended up having, we rent the Airbnb. We cover basically all the food and everything like that. Some folks are a little proud about the plane ticket, so they take care of the plane ticket. But we always are like, hey, and if you need help, we normally say is, oh, we got a lot of miles and all this kind of stuff, because that makes it feel a little bit less like we're banging it for them. Right. We got proud Midwesterners who've worked really hard in their lives, and now I'm, still a punching bag, to be that brother or that son. But yeah, it's one of those things where like we kind of take care of that. And then there's other things that we're still dreaming about, but I think it just really helps you dream about like what you're looking for, right? I think we're gonna build a compound, not like we were living
in Puerto Rico or where?
Well, there's a wider dream we're still trying to solidify, which is like having kind of like a compound, which, is a loaded word, but like high acreage, to do, fun hood rat stuff, I'll say, like enjoy, but having that close to wherever we live. So if we split our time between Puerto Rico and Utah, having it in both places, that type of thing. I want to learn to fly. Like I, have enjoyed that a lot, right? So that's another thing like I want to do. And then, get a PC-12 potentially, like these types of things. A lot of those conversations, now we're great, but we should have had those 10 years ago, right? And we were pretty good about that, when we first started dating, like thinking about like combining values or being aligned in values. But this was the forcing function to kind of think more broadly about it.
Does she align differently with vision, or is she kind of someone who supports your vision? How is that dynamic?
Our third date, I was in a 7-year relationship before, which, in my early 20s to my like, late-ish 20s, and the values were not clearly aligned. And so, and it wasn't, my fault, her fault, it was everyone's at fault kind of a thing. And so that ended, and then, took a break and then started dating again. And I was very, very clear with like what I wanted and my values and lifestyle, like literally third date. I was just like, hey, like, and we had been talking for about a month because she was traveling, I was traveling before we went on our first date. And I was just like, just so you know, like, here's how I think about the world. Here's what's really important to me. And it wasn't like this long list. There were just a couple of things. And this whole like entrepreneur lifestyle, I don't foresee this changing, right? Like I'm probably, even if it's, I'm running a dog shelter, like that dog shelter is going to be my life. Like this is just how I am, what brings me joy. And, even with kids, like I'm going to shape that. I'm going to be a good father, but I'm going to shape my world around allowing me to like do this and be a great father, right? Which, obviously there's constraints and trade-offs and all that kind of fun stuff. But I was really upfront with that. So we were pretty aligned on like the big stuff. I think on some of these, kind of more medium or other big stuff or small stuff, I find it's hard to like dream big, right? It's just really hard to do that in general. And so I find myself kind of pushing her to dream a little bit bigger, and not necessarily like anything crazy, but just like, like we can get a house cleaner, but what else is interesting, right? Like what else, like your wildest dreams when you were 8 years old, like what was really interesting? Let's think about that. And it doesn't have to be material. It doesn't have to be experience, but like, what are some things that like, if you could do whatever you wanted, like you want to go cure cancer? Let's go figure out how to cure cancer, like that type of a thing. So dreaming, but the values are pretty aligned, which I think is great. And I think that's probably the most important in a relationship is just the values, not necessarily the interest.
You're in Puerto Rico. There are tax advantages to that. What are?
Yep. Yeah. So we had moved. Paddle's a remote company. And so when we were looking to move, all of a sudden we were just like, okay, we can go anywhere. Where should we go? And so we started looking at a bunch of different places, and Puerto Rico wasn't on the list. And then someone had told me about the tax advantages, and the basic tax advantages, to kind of explain it. And it's a lot more complicated than some YouTube video you'll watch, because I watched a YouTube video, then you talk to 6 lawyers and you're like, oh, this is a little bit different. First is no capital gains, and you have to apply for it. And there's some restrictions and there's a bunch of other stuff, like some requirements, but 0 capital gains. And then if you have an LLC or a business entity there, and you're exporting services, so software, info products, entertainment, there's a bunch of stuff there, 4% income tax.
Okay.
And so those are the advantages. You have to live there. Your life has to be there. It's not just 183 days. Like your doctor's got to be there. This is what's called a closer connections test, those types of things. And then, there's some other, you have to own your primary residence you have to own in Puerto Rico. And then there's some donations and things like that you do on a yearly basis. And so that's a loose overview of the program.
Yeah. And do you find it's worth it then? So will Puerto Rico be your...
Yeah, it's really interesting. We love it. So I think it's one of those interesting things where, so we like live on the beach. And that was the big thing. We were like, yeah, the tax stuff's great, but I'll tell anyone listening, this whole notion of, well, if you have money, like what's the point of money if you can't live anywhere? It's like, that's not untrue, but it's like half true. What I mean by that is if you're not like at the end of your career, if you're like actually going to be like going at it and like trying to build something new or trying to do more and you like living on the beach, like, well, of course, like this is an advantage, right? And the way that we kind of decided on this was I built a spreadsheet with calculations, didn't put the numbers in. Jenny approved the spreadsheet. I said, what's the number that's worth it? You're going to pick the number. Then we plugged the number in. And if we cleared the number, we were going to move. Because again, we had never lived in a beach environment. So we were like, we liked the place at least enough to like make a move. And worst case, we would leave. But anytime I've seen someone move just because of the taxes, it's been a disaster.
Yes.
And it's just, it isn't worth it. But I look at it as like, okay, we're clearing a pretty good margin in terms of taxes, which is great because we want to invest that in XYZ. But also like, I live on the beach and it's amazing. It's an amazing lifestyle. And we originally had talked about the requirement's 3 years and it's only the gain while you're there. So any gain after, any gain before, like you don't necessarily get the tax benefits. But we were originally thinking like, okay, a forcing function is 5 years. If we commit to 5 years, we feel like we're making like the decision with the right inputs. But as we've been there, we're like, we kind of love it. So like we could see ourselves here and the schools are great, all that kind of fun stuff. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Where can people follow you, support you, ask you for money?
Whatever. My DMs are open, right? So I'm Patticus, Patticus, a childhood nickname on Twitter. It's probably the best place to find me right now. I'm at pc@patticus.com if you want to hit me up for anything. I know a lot about pricing. That's what normally people hit me up about. So, or benchmarks in the subscription space if you're a subscription e-commerce company. But yeah, happy to help.
Sweet. Well, thanks for coming into Austin. This has been another e-commerce conversations. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did and learned a nugget or two of information.
Awesome.
My first Puerto Rican.
Yeah. Yo soy puertorriqueño. So yeah. That's not how you're supposed to say it. Yeah. Buen gringo. I'm a good gringo. Don't worry.
There you go. Cheers. Keep on growing.